Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to a year of profound darkness, a time when the very heavens seemed to turn against humanity. We will explore why the year 1816 was so brutal, so unforgiving, that it became known as the year without a summer. But before we descend into the frost and famine, we must first understand the world as it was just before the catastrophe. We need to feel the brief, fragile moment of peace that made the subsequent horror all the more shocking. So settle in, close your eyes, and let's journey back to 1815, to a world holding its breath, unaware that the sky was about to fall. The year is 1815. You are living in a world exhausted by war. For over a decade, the Napoleonic Wars have bled the continent of Europe dry. Armies have marched and countermarched across your lands. Your village has sent its sons away, many never to return. You've endured shortages, high taxes to fund distant battles, and the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that comes with living in a world perpetually at war. News traveled slowly then, carried by horse or by ship, often arriving as rumor, months after the fact. The names of battles, Austerlitz, Trafalgar, Borodino, were spoken with a mixture of fear and grim pride in taverns and marketplaces. But now, it is over. Napoleon has been defeated at Waterloo. The monster, the ogre, the emperor, whatever you called him, is finally gone, exiled to a remote island in the South Atlantic. A collective sigh of relief ripples across the Western world. You can feel it in the air. The tension that has been a part of your life for as long as you can remember is beginning to dissolve. You are a farmer in New England, or a stonemason in Switzerland, or a shopkeeper in Wales. Your specific location matters less than the shared experience of this newfound peace. For the first time in years, you look at your children, without the gnawing fear that your sons will be conscripted into an army to fight in a foreign land for a cause you barely understand. You see the young men who did come back, some missing limbs, others with a haunted look in their eyes that never quite leaves, but they are home. The rhythm of daily life, so long disrupted by the drums of war, is starting to reassert itself. You focus on mending the fence at the edge of your property, on the health of your milk cow, on the leaky roof of your cottage. These are small, manageable problems, a welcome respite from the existential dread of conflict. You live your life by the season. This is the one constant, the one truth you hold to be self-evident. The sun rises, the sun sets. The spring thaw is followed by the summer heat, which ripens the crops for the autumn harvest, which in turn gives way to the winter cold. This cycle is your clock, your calendar, your God. Your entire existence, your food, your warmth, your survival, is predicated on the assumption that this cycle will continue as it always has. You have known bad years, of course, a late frost, a summer drought, a wet harvest. These are the natural hardships of life, the challenges you expect and prepare for as best you can, but you have never known the seasons themselves to simply fail. The thought is unimaginable, a concept as alien as a man walking on the moon. You attend church, and the prayers are no longer for victory in battle, but for a bountiful harvest and continued peace. You talk with your neighbors, and the conversations have shifted from the latest war news to the price of grain, the upcoming village fair, and local gossip. There is a sense of cautious optimism. Perhaps you think, things will finally get better. Perhaps your children will inherit a world more stable and prosperous than the one you have known. Yet, even in this atmosphere of relief, there are unsettling signs, small oddities, that you notice but cannot explain. In the late months of 1815, the sunsets begin to change. They are more spectacular, more vivid than you have ever seen. The sky ignites in fiery shades of red, orange and purple, so brilliant that it almost looks unnatural. Artists, like J.M.W. Derner in England, rush to their canvases to capture these breathtaking, almost apocalyptic-looking skies. You might comment on it to your spouse or a friend. "Never seen a sunset quite like that," you'd say, before shrugging it off as a peculiar quirk of the weather. There is also a persistent haze in the atmosphere, a thin, almost imperceptible veil that hangs in the air even on clear days. It is sometimes called a dry fog, because it doesn't carry the dampness of a normal mist. It seems to dim the sunlight, casting the world in a slightly paler, less vibrant light. The sun itself, when you can look at it through this haze, appears to have a reddish or brownish tint, its edges strangely distinct, its warmth feeling a little less intense than you remember. Again you dismiss it. Weather is fickle. Your mind is on your work, on the tangible realities of your life. The sky is the sky. The sun is the sun. You have no way of knowing that these beautiful sunsets and the strange dry fog are not local phenomena. You cannot conceive that the very air you are breathing is carrying a silent, invisible messenger of doom. You are entirely unaware that halfway around the world, on an island in the Dutch East Indies you have never even heard of, a cataclysm has occurred on a scale beyond all human comprehension. On the island of Sumbawa, a mountain named Tambora has torn itself apart. In April of 1815, Mount Tambora produced the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history. It ejected a colossal amount of rock, ash, and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The immediate effects were devastating for the local population, wiping out entire kingdoms and killing tens of thousands. But the deadliest part of the eruption was not the lava or the pyroclastic flow. It was the vast, unimaginable cloud of fine sulfate aerosols it hurled more than 40 kilometers up, straight into the stratosphere. And now, as you stand in your field in Vermont, or your cobblestone street in Geneva, celebrating the end of one war, you are unknowingly in the path of another. This one is not a war of men and cannons, but a war of nature against the very foundations of your survival. The aerosols from Tambora are being carried by high-altitude winds, slowly, silently, inexorably spreading around the entire globe. This vast stratospheric veil is beginning to form a shield, reflecting sunlight back into space. You finish your day's work as the spectacular, eerie sunset once again paints the sky. You go inside your home, light a candle against the encroaching dusk, and eat your simple meal, thankful for the peace. You feel a slight chill in the evening air, perhaps a bit more pronounced than usual for this time of year. You add another log to the fire, pull your blanket a little tighter, and drift to sleep, ignorant of the cold, dark shadow that is gathering in the stratosphere above, preparing to descend upon your unsuspecting world. The greatest war was not over, it was just beginning. Let us now leave your quiet, unsuspecting farm in the Western world. We must travel across the globe, over oceans and continents, to a place where the brief peace of 1815 means nothing. We journey to the Dutch East Indies, to a lush tropical island called Sumbawa. You are no longer the New England farmer, or the Swiss stonemason. For this chapter you are an inhabitant of the kingdom of Tambora, living at the foot of the great mountain that gives your home its name. The volcano is a constant presence in your life, a sacred and mighty peak you call the Great Mountain. It has been dormant for centuries, a benevolent giant sleeping over your prosperous land. But in early April of 1815, the giant began to stir. You first feel it as a low, deep shudder in the earth beneath your feet. It is not an earthquake, not the sharp, violent jolt you might have experienced before. It is a persistent tremor, a vibration that seems to emanate from the very bowels of the world. Then comes the sound, a low, continuous rumbling, like distant thunder that never fades. Over the next few days the sound grows in intensity. It becomes a series of thunderous explosions, sharp, percussive booms that shake the walls of your hut and rattle your teeth. You are not alone in your confusion and fear. Your entire village gathers, speaking in hushed, anxious tones. The consensus is that the sounds must be cannon fire. The British have a naval presence in these waters, and their warships are known for their power. Your ruler, the Raja of Tambora, believes it is an attack on a neighboring settlement and dispatches a canoe to investigate. You watch it paddle away into the hazy distance, unaware that it is heading towards its doom. The date is April 10th. The intermittent booms have now merged into a single, continuous, deafening roar. It is a sound so immense, so all-encompassing that it transcends hearing. You feel it in your bones, in your chest, a physical pressure that makes it hard to breathe. All conversation ceases. Shouting is useless against the cataclysmic noise. You look up at the mountain, and what you see defies all reason. The entire peak has become a fountain of liquid fire. 3 distinct colossal columns of flame are punching a hole in the sky, rising miles into the air, merging into a terrifying vortex of red and orange fury. The sky, which was a brilliant tropical blue just hours ago, is now a swirling cauldron of black and grey. Then the world begins to end. A hurricane of pumice and ash, a pyroclastic flow, detaches from the mountain and moves with unimaginable speed. It is not like a landslide of rock and soil. It is a superheated cloud of gas and pulverized stone, a whirlwind of death that scours the earth clean. It moves faster than a galloping horse, and it burns everything in its path. Your village is just far enough away to witness the obliteration of the neighboring kingdoms of Pekat and Sangar. You see the cloud, a churning grey monster, swallow the landscape whole. The forests, the villages, the people, everything vanishes in an instant, erased from existence. What comes next is the darkness. As the great plume in the sky collapses under its own weight, it chokes out the sun. It is not the coming of twilight, or the onset of night. It is an absolute suffocating blackness, as if the universe has been extinguished. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. You cannot see the person standing next to you. The air becomes thick and heavy, filled with falling ash and gritty sand that stings your eyes and coats your throat. You stumble, seeking shelter in your home, but the darkness follows you inside. It is total. You light a lamp, but its flame is a tiny flickering speck, casting no more than a few inches of light into the impenetrable gloom. For 3 days you live in this darkness. The roaring of the volcano continues, a constant reminder of the world's violent unraveling. The air is foul with the smell of sulfur, an acrid stench of brimstone that burns your lungs. Fine ash continues to rain down, accumulating like a demonic snowfall. It gets into your food, your water, your hair, your bed. The roof of your home begins to groan under the immense weight. You hear the cracking of timber and the thud of collapsing structures nearby, followed by muffled screams that are quickly swallowed by the roar. There is no day, there is no night, there is only the endless blackness, and the sound of the world being unmade. Your sense of time dissolves. Panic gives way to a dull, listless despair. When the light finally begins to return on the 3rd day, it is not the bright tropical sun you remember. It is a feeble, grey, spectral light, filtering through a dense, permanent haze that has settled over the world. You step outside, and you no longer recognize your home. Everything, every tree, every field, every river, every building, is buried under several feet of heavy grey ash. The lush, vibrant green of the island is gone, replaced by a monochrome wasteland, a silent, desolate moonscape. The trees that still stand are stripped of their leaves, skeletal remains clawing at the dim sky. You make your way to the coast, desperate for a way out, but the sea offers no escape. The surface of the ocean is covered for miles by a thick mat of floating pumice stones, some several feet thick, creating vast moving islands of rock. Ships are trapped, and the canoes of those who tried to flee have been crushed or overturned. The sea, once your source of life and transport, has become another deadly prison. Tens of thousands of people around you are dead. either incinerated by the pyroclastic flows, crushed by their collapsing homes, or starved in the weeks that followed. The culture of Tambora, its language, its people, its history, all of it is now buried under a thick blanket of volcanic ash, a civilization erased. You stand in the ruins of your world, under a sun you can barely see, breathing air that tastes of dust and death. You have survived the eruption, but you are now living in its aftermath, a hellscape of starvation and disease, and you remain utterly oblivious to the most terrible truth. The fine dust and sulfur that caused your 3 days of darkness were only the heaviest particles, the ones that fell back to Earth. The lightest, most insidious part of the cloud, an invisible veil of sulfate aerosols, was blasted so high it reached the stratosphere. It did not fall. Instead, it began to drift on the high-altitude winds, a silent, invisible plague, beginning its long, slow journey to encircle the entire planet, on its way to the farmer in Vermont and the stonemason in Switzerland. Your apocalypse was just the prologue. Let us now leave the immediate, incandescent horror of Sumbawa and return to your life, far away in the northern hemisphere. The year 1815 has given way to 1816. The spectacular sunsets of the previous autumn have faded into a strange, persistent feature of the sky, but you have grown accustomed to them. Winter was long and cold, but winter is always long and cold. You are hopeful for the coming spring, for the thaw, for the cyclical rebirth of the world that you have always relied upon. But spring does not arrive as it should. There is a profound strangeness in the air, a subtle but deeply unsettling alteration of your reality. The primary cause, the thing you begin to notice and comment on to your neighbors, is the fog. It is not a normal fog, the thick, wet, rolling mist that rises from the river on a cool morning. This is something else entirely. It is a dry fog, a persistent pale haze that clings to the landscape day after day, week after week. It does not feel damp. It has no smell. It simply exists, a thin luminous veil that hangs between you and the world. It blurs the edges of distant hills, softens the outlines of trees, and mutes the colors of the landscape. The brilliant, sharp greens of new spring growth appear duller, washed out, as if viewed through a dirty piece of glass. The sky, even on a day with no clouds, is not a vibrant blue. It is a pale, milky, washed-out cyan, a faint and sickly version of its former self. At the heart of this atmospheric strangeness is the sun. Your relationship with the sun is fundamental, an ancient and unspoken pact. Its warmth guides the growing season. Its light dictates the rhythm of your day. But the sun of 1816 is a changed entity. It is a weak, anemic star. When it rises in the morning, it does so without its usual brilliant glare. You can often look directly at it, a pale, shimmering disk hanging in the hazy sky. It lacks power. It lacks authority. It seems distant and indifferent. Throughout the day, the sunlight that reaches you feels different. It is a cool, filtered light, devoid of the familiar, penetrating warmth that should be driving the frost from the ground and encouraging your newly planted seeds to sprout. You work in your fields, and though the sun is high in the sky, you feel a persistent chill that seems to emanate from the earth itself. The warmth on your skin is fleeting, superficial. The ground beneath your feet remains stubbornly cold and damp. Sometimes, strange astronomical phenomena accompany this veiled sun. Sunspots, dark blemishes on the face of the sun, become unusually visible to the naked eye through the haze. Normally, these are a matter for astronomers with telescopes, but now, anyone can see them. People stare up at the pale orb, pointing at the strange, dark smudges. Without a scientific explanation, speculation runs wild. Are they a sign? An omen from God? A blemish on the face of creation itself? mirroring the blemishes on a sin-sick world. The sun, the source of all life, appears to be diseased, and this simple, terrifying observation sends a shiver of primal fear through your community. The fog also plays tricks with light and perception. At times it takes on a strange, ruddy or yellowish color, casting the world in a jaundiced, otherworldly glow. It gives the landscape an eerie, silent quality. The sounds of birds seem muffled, distant. The world feels quiet, subdued, as if it is holding its breath. This perpetual haze creates a profound sense of claustrophobia, a feeling of being trapped under a low, oppressive ceiling. You have no framework to understand what is happening. There is no science of meteorology to explain it, no concept of a global atmospheric system. Your understanding of the world is local. You assume this is a regional phenomenon, a strange spell of weather that will eventually pass. You consult almanacs, the repositories of folk wisdom and past weather patterns, but the almanacs have no answers. The oldest members of your community, those who have seen 80 or more seasons come and go, shake their heads. They have never seen anything like this. This is not a variation, it is a violation of the natural order. This atmospheric veil, this stratospheric blanket of sulfuric acid droplets from Tambora, is the direct agent of your coming misery. It is reflecting a critical amount of solar radiation back into space before it can reach the surface of the Earth. The planet is being starved of its vital energy. The global thermostat has been turned down. This isn't just a local weather event. It is a planetary crisis happening on a scale you cannot possibly imagine. The energy that should be warming the soil of your farm in Pennsylvania, or melting the snow in the Swiss Alps, or heating the coastal waters of Ireland, is being scattered back into the void. You continue with your daily routines, planting your crops in the cold, wet soil, trusting in the eternal promise of the seasons. But a deep, gnawing unease begins to settle in your heart. Every morning you wake up and look to the east, hoping to see a clear, brilliant sunrise, and every morning you are greeted by the same pale, hazy sky, and the same weak, impotent sun. The dry fog becomes a symbol of a world that is fundamentally broken. It is the visible evidence of a promise being rescinded, a covenant between humanity and nature being torn asunder. You are living under a veil, unaware that it is slowly, methodically strangling the life out of your world. The cold is coming, and there will be no escaping it. The pale, hazy spring of 1816 finally slumps into what should be summer. You have waited for this transition with a growing sense of desperation. Summer is the time of work and growth, of long days and warm nights, the period when the world is at its most alive. It is the season that redeems the hardships of winter and promises the bounty of autumn. But the summer you have been waiting for does not arrive. What comes instead is a cruel, monstrous parody of the season, an unrelenting year-long winter that will forever be seared into the memory of those who survive it. The month of June begins, a time that should be synonymous with warmth and flourishing life. Instead, a savage, unseasonal cold descends from the north. You awaken one morning, not to the sound of birdsong, but to an unnerving silence. You look out your window, and your heart freezes. The world outside is white. A thick blanket of snow covers your fields, your fences, your neatly planted rows of corn and potatoes. It is June 6th, and you are living in a blizzard. In New England, this is a moment of pure disbelief. Snow in June is not just unusual, it is an aberration, a profound violation of natural law. You trudge outside, the icy powder crunching under your boots. You see your corn shoots, which had just begun to show promise, blackened and frozen, sagging under the weight of the snow. The new leaves on the oak and maple trees are seared and withered, as if by fire, victims of the brutal frost. You see birds falling from the sky, frozen solid, their songs silenced mid-note. Newly shorn sheep, stripped of their winter wool in anticipation of summer heat, huddle together and freeze to death in the fields. The landscape looks like the dead of January, but your calendar, the rational human measurement of time, tells you it is nearly midsummer. This is not a single freak event. The cold is relentless. The snow melts after a day or two, leaving behind a soggy brown lifeless mess. But the frost persists. Night after night, temperatures plummet below freezing. Any plants that survive the snow are killed off by the repeated nightly frosts. You try to replant, a desperate act of faith, but it is useless. The ground remains too cold, the air too hostile. The sun, a pale disk in the perpetually hazy sky, provides no warmth, no relief. In Europe, the situation is no better, though it manifests differently. Instead of snow, there is water. An endless, bone-chilling rain begins to fall. For weeks on end, the sky is a leaden grey canvas, releasing a ceaseless deluge. Rivers across the continent, the Rhine, the Seine, the Thames swell into monstrous churning torrents. They burst their banks, inundating entire valleys, sweeping away homes, bridges, and livestock. You are living in a world of mud and water. The constant dampness seeps into everything: your clothes, your bedding, your bones. A fire is your only source of comfort, but firewood is scarce and damp, and the smoke fills your small home as you huddle close, listening to the incessant drumming of rain on the roof. July arrives, the heart of summer, yet the cold remains. In North America, frozen rivers are reported as far south as Pennsylvania. You go swimming on the 4th of Independence Day, not for pleasure, but on a grim dare, emerging onto the ice-rimmed banks with chattering teeth and blue skin. Ice forms on ponds and water troughs overnight. The hopes you had for a late-season recovery for your crops evaporate. It becomes clear that there will be no summer harvest. There may be no harvest at all. This seasonal death creates a profound psychological crisis. Your entire life, your culture, your folklore, it is all built around the predictable progression of the seasons. Summer is a time for celebration, for fairs and festivals, but in 1816, there is nothing to celebrate. Communities cancel their midsummer festivities. There is no joy, only a grim collective anxiety. You gather with your neighbors, but your conversations are circular and desperate. What is happening? Why has God forsaken us? The almanacs are useless. The preachers offer prayers for warmth that go unanswered. The very concept of time begins to feel broken. You are living in a state of suspended animation, trapped in an endless late autumn. The natural world, your most reliable guide, has become a source of confusion and terror. The normal cues are gone. The insects are silent. The migratory birds that did arrive are dying or have already fled south again. The world feels empty, hollowed out. This is the direct physical consequence of the stratospheric veil of Tambora's aerosols. The sunlight that should be warming the northern hemisphere is being blocked and scattered. This disruption has thrown global weather systems into chaos, altering the path of the jet stream and allowing frigid polar air to plunge southward with unprecedented frequency. The endless rain in Europe is a result of the same system, as altered atmospheric pressures draw moisture-laden air over the continent, where it cools and condenses. You are living through a planetary-scale science experiment, but you are not the observer. You are the subject. Each morning you wake with a knot of dread in your stomach, hoping the nightmare is over, only to find the same cold, grey, hostile world waiting for you. The death of the seasons is not just an agricultural problem, It is an attack on the very foundations of your sanity and your understanding of how the world is supposed to work. The cheerful promise of summer has been replaced by the chilling reality of ice and frost, and the hunger that will inevitably follow is now no longer a fear, but a certainty. The failed summer has bled into a mockery of autumn. This should be the most hopeful time of the year, the culmination of all your labor. Autumn is the season of harvest, the time for gathering, for filling the granaries and cellars with enough food to survive the coming winter. The sight of golden wheat, the earthy smell of freshly dug potatoes, the weight of a ripe apple in your hand. These are the sensory anchors of your survival. In 1816, this promise rots before your eyes. The harvest never comes. You walk through your fields, and what you see is a landscape of decay. Your corn stalks, which should be tall and heavy with full ears, are stunted, barely waist high. The few ears that did form are small, misshapen, the kernels shrunken and underdeveloped. When you peel back the husk, you find not rows of plump yellow corn, but a pale, milky pulp, or worse, a black, fuzzy mold. The constant cold and rain have prevented the crop from maturing. It is useless, fit only for pigs, and even they might sicken on it. Your potato crop is a more intimate, heartbreaking disaster. In places like Ireland, Germany, and the northeastern United States, the potato is not just a crop. It is the very bedrock of your diet. It is the food that keeps your family alive through the lean winter months. You dig into the cold, waterlogged soil with a feeling of dread. You pull up the first plant, and the potatoes that cling to the roots are small, the size of marbles instead of fists. Worse, many of them have turned to a foul-smelling, black, slimy ooze in the ground. The late blight, a fungus that thrives in the relentless cold and damp, has destroyed them from within. You plunge your hands into the mud, desperately searching for healthy tubers, but you find only decay. Each rotting potato you pull from the earth feels like a nail being hammered into your family's coffin. The hayfields are a similar wasteland. Hay is not just grass. It is the fuel for your livestock, your horsepower for plowing and transportation. Without a good hay crop, your animals will starve over the winter. The cold has stunted its growth, and the ceaseless rains have made it impossible to cut and dry. The hay that you do manage to gather is damp and moldy. You know that feeding it to your oxen or dairy cow is a risk. Moldy hay can kill them, but letting them starve is a certainty of death. You are faced with an impossible choice. In the grain-growing regions of Europe, the sight is equally grim. The wheat, oat and barley fields are a vision of failure. The stalks are thin and weak, and the heads of grain are light and airy, containing little more than chaff. The incessant rain has caused the grain to sprout on the stalk, a phenomenon called viviparity. These green shoots, a sign of life, are in this context a mark of death for the harvest. The sprouted grain is worthless for milling into flour. Other crops have been beaten into the mud by the endless downpours, where they now lie, rotting. The fruit orchards offer no solace. The severe frosts of the late spring and early summer killed the blossoms on the trees. There can be no fruit without flowers. The apple trees are bare. The cherry and peach trees are barren. The berry bushes that should be heavy with fruit are empty. The sweetness of summer, the jams and preserves that would provide a taste of sunshine in the dead of winter, will not exist this year. This widespread crop failure is not a localized misfortune. It is happening everywhere, from the eastern coast of America to the plains of Hungary, from the fields of Ireland to the farms of southern China. The story is the same: cold, rain, frost and rot. The global agricultural system, a delicate dance between sunlight, temperature and water, has collapsed. The invisible veil in the sky has severed the connection between the sun and the soil. The psychological toll of this creeping disaster is immense. As a farmer, your identity is tied to your ability to coax life from the earth. You have done everything right. You plowed the fields, you sowed the seeds, you tended the crops, but your labor has come to nothing. You feel a profound sense of failure, of helplessness in the face of a hostile, incomprehensible force. You look at your empty fields, at the rotting plants that represent your failed efforts, and you feel a despair that is as cold and deep as the damp soil beneath your feet. You stand at the edge of your field as a cold autumn wind blows. There are no sounds of harvest, no cheerful shouts of workers, no rhythmic swish of the scythe. There is only the silence of decay. You look towards your barn, knowing its shelves and bins are empty. You look towards your house, knowing your larder is bare. Winter is coming. It is no longer a distant threat on the horizon. It is a tangible presence, and for the first time in your life, you have no defense against it. You have nothing. Your rotting fields are a promise, not of sustenance, but of the long, dark, hungry months that lie ahead. The decay in the fields quickly metastasizes into a sickness in the marketplace. The empty granaries and rotting potato pits are not just a private tragedy for you as a farmer. They are the source of a catastrophic economic shockwave that rips through every level of society. Survival is no longer just a matter of enduring the cold. It becomes a brutal calculation of cost and access. You are now a player in the grim new game of hunger economics. At first, there is disbelief. The harvest has failed, but you have a small reserve, some grain from the previous year, a few salted meats. You go to the market to supplement your meager stores, and you receive the first shock. The price of everything has risen. The baker, his face grim, informs you that the price of a loaf of bread has doubled in a week. He has to pay more for flour, if he can even find any of a decent quality, and so you must pay more as well. You buy less than you need, your stomach tightening with a fear that is no longer abstract. Within weeks, the situation spirals out of control. The laws of supply and demand become a weapon. The supply of food is dwindling to almost nothing, while the demand, the desperate need of millions of hungry people, is absolute. Prices do not just rise, they skyrocket into the realm of the absurd. A sack of flour, a bushel of oats, a bag of potatoes, things you once produced or purchased with modest effort, are now luxury items, their cost increasing tenfold, 20-fold, or more. Your life savings, painstakingly accumulated over years of hard work, can now be wiped out in a single trip to the market to buy a few weeks' worth of food for your family. This creates a terrifying new social order. The world is cleaved in two, those who have food and those who do not. The wealthy landowners, the merchants who had the foresight or the capital to hoard grain from previous years, are now the new kings. They can set any price they wish, and people will pay it, selling their tools, their livestock, their land, their very future, for one more meal. You watch as your neighbor is forced to sell his only ox, the beast that plows his fields, for a pittance to buy a small sack of moldy rye. You know that even if the weather improves next year, he will have no means to plant a new crop. He has traded his future for a few more weeks of survival. For you, the daily anxiety is grueling. You count your coins. You measure your dwindling flour supplies by the spoonful. You thin the soup until it is little more than hot water flavored with a single precious potato. You listen to your children crying from hunger, a sound that shreds your soul, and you feel a boiling rage towards the merchants and speculators who profit from your misery. This rage does not remain passive. Food riots erupt across Europe, in cities like Paris and Munich, in market towns across England and Italy. Desperate crowds of hungry people gather. You may find yourself part of one. The protest begins with desperate pleas, but quickly escalates. A merchant who refuses to lower his prices has his shop stormed, his windows smashed, his precious sacks of grain dragged out into the street and distributed among the ravenous crowd. The authorities respond with swift brutality. Soldiers on horseback charge into the masses, swinging clubs and sabers. The protest is suppressed, but the underlying desperation only deepens. Governments, where they are effective at all, are overwhelmed. They attempt to impose price controls, but this only causes the merchants to hide their stocks, selling them on the black market for even higher prices. They try to import grain from regions thought to be unaffected, like Russia or the Ottoman Empire, but transportation is slow and expensive. The shipments that do arrive are a drop in the ocean of need, and they are often commandeered by the powerful or sold at exorbitant prices, never reaching those who need it most. Charity, once a cornerstone of your community, begins to break down. The church can only offer so much from its meager stores. Your neighbors, once willing to share, now guard their own small reserves with suspicion and fear. You look at the people you have known your whole life, and you see them not as friends, but as competitors in the savage struggle for survival. The bonds of community, so vital for enduring normal hardships, are frayed to the breaking point by the relentless, gnawing pressure of hunger. You are forced to make agonizing decisions. Do you sell the family's milk cow? Her milk keeps your youngest child alive, but the money she would bring could buy enough grain to feed the rest of the family for a month. Do you eat the seed grain you have painstakingly saved for next year's planting? Eating it means survival now, but guarantees starvation next year. There are no good choices, only different paths to ruin. The economy of starvation has its own currency, desperation. It transforms a loaf of bread from a simple staple into an object of ultimate value. It turns neighbors into rivals and the marketplace from a place of commerce into a battlefield. You are a victim of a global climate event, but your immediate enemy is the number written on a price tag, the cold hard math of a world where the cost of living has become the cost of dying. The failure of the harvest and the subsequent economic collapse set the world in motion. Staying put is no longer an option. Your home, once a place of safety and familiarity, has become a trap, a place where you are certain to starve. And so you make the most agonizing decision of your life. You leave. You join a vast, desperate river of humanity, a great migration of the hungry, flowing across the blighted landscape in search of survival. The decision is born of pure desperation. You have sold everything you can. Your tools, your furniture, the family pewter, your land if you own it, is now worthless because it produces nothing. Your final reserve of food is gone. You look at the gaunt faces of your family, your children's eyes large and haunted in their thinning faces, and you know that to remain is to die. So you pack what little you have left, a spare blanket, a cooking pot, any remaining scraps of food into a handcart or onto your back, and you close the door to your home for the last time. You step onto the road, and you realize you are not alone. Far from it. The roads are choked with people just like you. Entire families trudge through the mud and slush, their faces etched with a common misery. Solitary figures, cloaked in rags, shuffle along with their heads bowed. The procession is mostly silent, a grim parade of the dispossessed. There is no camaraderie, only a shared silent understanding of each other's desperation. Every other person on this road is another mouth to feed, another potential rival for whatever scarce resources might be found ahead. Your journey has no clear destination. It is fueled by rumor and hope, two of the most unreliable guides. You hear whispers that a town 10 miles away has received a grain shipment. So you walk 10 miles, your children weeping from exhaustion, only to find the rumor was false, or that the grain is already gone, or that the town guards are turning away all newcomers at spear point. You hear that the government in a larger city is distributing free soup. So you change direction, joining the flow of people heading towards the city, a desperate pilgrimage to a place that might offer salvation. The journey itself is a new kind of hell. The cold is a constant companion. The endless rain of the European summer, or the unseasonal snows of America, turn the roads into impassable quagmires of mud. Your shoes, if you are lucky enough to have any, are quickly worn through. You walk barefoot on the frozen ground, your feet cracked and bleeding. Shelter is wherever you can find it. A leaking abandoned barn, a shallow cave, or simply huddled together under a tree, covered by a thin damp blanket. Disease stalks your every step. The migrating crowds are a breeding ground for typhus, which the Irish call famine fever. It is spread by body lice, and in these crowded, unsanitary conditions it runs rampant. You see people collapse by the side of the road, their bodies shaking with fever, their minds delirious. You hurry past them, pulling your children closer, trying not to breathe the same air, even though you know it is not spread that way. Dysentery, caused by contaminated water and starvation, is even more common. The roadside is littered with the sick and dying. Their quiet moans a constant soundtrack to your journey. You are transformed from a respectable farmer or artisan into a beggar. You become one of the figures you might have pitied or scorned in better times. You knock on the doors of houses in the villages you pass, holding out a hand, your voice cracking as you ask for a piece of bread, a handful of vegetables, anything. Mostly the doors are slammed in your face. The people inside are just as scared as you are, hoarding their own meager supplies. Sometimes, a door opens a crack, and a hand thrusts out a crust of stale bread before shutting you out once more. You learn to swallow your pride. Pride cannot fill an empty stomach. This mass migration terrifies the established authorities. The sight of thousands of wandering paupers is a threat to social order. In many towns and parishes, militias are formed to keep the beggar armies out. They set up blockades on the roads, treating you not as a fellow countryman in distress, but as an invading enemy. You are met with hostility and violence, turned back from the places you hoped would save you. In America, this migration takes on a different character. The call is not just for a nearby town, but for the West. A belief takes hold that the strange weather is a local affliction of the East Coast. People sell their failing farms in New England for pennies on the dollar, and pack their families into Conestoga wagons, heading towards the promise of Ohio, Indiana, and beyond. This westward exodus, which would become a defining feature of American history, receives a powerful, desperate push from the year without a summer. But the journey is perilous, and the promise of a better life is far from guaranteed. You are a refugee in your own country. You have been stripped of your home, your livelihood, your dignity. Your entire existence has been reduced to the next step, the next potential meal, the next sunrise you might survive to see. The desperate journey is a brutal filter, and you see death every day. You are walking through the valley of the shadow, a member of a lost tribe, wandering a cold, barren earth. Let us now focus our lens on a specific place, where the catastrophe reached its most distilled and horrific form. We travel to Switzerland. Your new identity is that of a Swiss villager, perhaps a watchmaker from the Jura Mountains, or a farmer on the high Alpine plateau. You are trapped. Your country is landlocked, a mountainous island surrounded by a sea of European desperation. There is nowhere to run, and the sky itself has declared war upon you. The Swiss nightmare of 1816 and 1817 stands as one of the grimmest case studies of the entire crisis. Switzerland's geography, its greatest asset in times of peace and tourism, becomes its fatal flaw. The Alps, with their high altitudes, are naturally colder than the surrounding lowlands. The year without a summer exacerbates this to an extreme degree. While other parts of Europe experience cold rain, your mountain passes are choked with summer snow. The growing season in the high valleys, short even in a good year, is completely non-existent. Glaciers advance with terrifying speed, grinding down into valleys that had been pastureland for generations. You witness the ice reclaiming the earth. The rains in the lower plateaus are relentless and biblical in their scope. The country's Great Lakes, Geneva, Constance, Zurich, swell to unprecedented levels, flooding towns and ruining the fertile land along their shores. The River Rhine, born in the Swiss Alps, becomes a raging monster, its waters a torrent of brown, churning destruction. You watch as your small plot of land, your family's source of sustenance for centuries, disappears beneath the flood waters. The failure of the grain harvest is absolute. The government declares a national emergency, but its options are limited. Switzerland must import the vast majority of its food, even in a normal year. Now the surrounding nations, France, Germany, Austria, are facing their own severe shortages. They slam their borders shut, hoarding what little grain they have. The trade routes are severed. You are completely isolated, cut off from any potential source of aid. The price of bread becomes a terrifying metric of your doom. By 1817, the crisis reaches its peak. You hear of riots in market towns where crowds, maddened by hunger, storm bakeries, only to find the ovens cold and the shelves bare. The government makes desperate attempts to buy grain from distant ports like Odessa on the Black Sea, but the journey over the Alps on frozen, treacherous roads is a logistical nightmare. The few convoys that make it through are frequently attacked and looted by starving mobs long before they reach their intended destinations. In this enclosed crucible of starvation, humanity is stripped down to its most elemental, horrifying basics. You witness scenes you would have thought impossible. People in your own village begin to eat things that were never meant for human consumption. You see your neighbors scavenging the barren forests for acorns and beech nuts, grinding them into a bitter, indigestible flour. They dig up the roots of ferns and boil grasses and weeds into a thin, watery gruel that offers little more than the illusion of a meal. The hunger becomes so all-consuming that even the family pets are no longer safe. The village dogs and cats disappear, consumed in secret acts of desperation. You look away, pretending not to know, because you understand the terrible logic that drives it. Then the hunger turns to darker, more unspeakable things. Rumors spread of people eating rats caught in the cellars. Worse rumors follow, whispers of bodies being exhumed from graveyards for their flesh. While these stories are impossible to verify, the very fact that they are told and believed speaks to the profound psychological horror that has gripped your society. You hear credible, documented accounts of what becomes known as kummerspeck or grief bacon, the flesh of those who have died from starvation being consumed by their starving survivors. This is not ritual cannibalism. It is the ultimate act of desperation, a final terrible surrender of human dignity in the face of annihilation. Official government reports from the time paint a harrowing picture. They describe people as looking like living skeletons, their skin stretched tight over their bones, their eyes hollowed out by malnutrition. Diseases like dropsy, which causes the body to swell with fluid, give the starving a grotesque, bloated appearance. You see these walking ghosts in the streets, their movements slow and apathetic, their minds clouded by hunger. The Swiss government tries to organize relief efforts, setting up soup kitchens that serve a thin broth made from bone meal and whatever scraps can be found. But the need is too vast. For every person who receives a ladle of soup, there are dozens more who get nothing. You may stand in line for hours, weak and shivering in the cold, only to be told that the soup has run out just as you reach the front. The despair is absolute. In your landlocked prison, under the grey, ungiving sky, you are living through a slow-motion apocalypse. The social fabric has dissolved, leaving only the individual, animalistic struggle to survive. The Swiss nightmare is a terrifying lesson in what happens when a society is completely cut off, left to its own devices in a world where the fundamental laws of nature have been broken. You are a prisoner of both geography and the heavens, and there is no escape. We now cross the water to Ireland. Here, the story of 1816 is not just a tale of a freak weather event. It is a grim and terrible dress rehearsal for the even greater catastrophe that would define Irish history just a few decades later, the Great Hunger. You are an Irish tenant farmer living in a cramped, smoky cottage on a tiny patch of land that you rent from an often absent landlord. Your life is already precarious, but the year without a summer pushes you over the edge into a special circle of hell where hunger and disease become inextricably linked. Your existence is almost entirely dependent on a single crop, the potato. The lumper potato, as it's known, grows well in Ireland's poor soil and provides a remarkable amount of sustenance from a small plot of land. It is the food that fuels your family, the nutritional bedrock of your life. But it is a monoculture, and a fragile one. As we've seen, the potato is uniquely vulnerable to the cold, damp conditions of 1816. The late blight, a fungus that turns the potatoes to a black, putrid mush, thrives in this environment. When you go to dig your potato patch, your hands scrabbling in the cold, wet earth, you are met with the now familiar stench of decay. The harvest is a catastrophic failure. Unlike in other parts of Europe, where wheat or rye might offer a poor alternative, in Ireland there is no alternative. The potato is everything. Its failure is a sentence of starvation. The oat crop, which you grow in a small corner of your field to pay the rent to your landlord, has also failed. This presents you with a diabolical dilemma. If you eat the few oats you manage to salvage, you will be evicted from your home for non-payment of rent. If you sell the oats to pay the rent, your family will starve. It is a choice between homelessness and starvation, two paths leading to the same ruin. As famine tightens its grip, a second, equally deadly enemy emerges from the shadows: disease. Malnutrition systematically destroys your body's ability to fight off infection. Your immune system is collapsing. It is in this weakened state that you become a perfect host for typhus. This is not the mild typhus of today. This is a virulent, deadly epidemic fever spread by body lice. In your small, crowded cottage, huddled together for warmth, with no way to wash yourselves or your clothes, the lice spread easily from person to person. The disease begins with a headache and a high fever. Then comes the rash, dark red spots that give it its other name, petechial fever. Your mind becomes clouded, descending into a delirious state. The mortality rate is terrifyingly high. Entire families are wiped out within a matter of weeks. You watch your neighbors sicken and die, and you pray that the lice do not find their way to your family, a prayer that is almost certainly in vain. Dysentery, or the bloody flux, follows close behind. Caused by contaminated food and water, it ravages your already starving body. The endless streams of refugees on the roads, with no access to clean water or sanitation, spread the disease wherever they go. The ditches alongside the roads become open sewers and mass graves. The response from the British administration in Dublin is slow, bureaucratic, and woefully inadequate. They are operating on a political ideology of laissez-faire, a belief that the market should be left to sort things out on its own. They fail to grasp the scale of the catastrophe. They set up a few fever hospitals, but these are quickly overwhelmed, becoming little more than places where the sick are sent to die, isolating them from the general population. Grain is still being exported from Ireland's ports to England, while you and your countrymen are starving, a bitter irony that fuels a deep and lasting resentment. Your experience of 1816 is a landscape of human suffering that shocks even the most hardened observers. You witness the roadside death, where people simply lie down by the side of the road, too weak to take another step, and wait for the end. You see children, their bellies swollen from malnutrition, their limbs like sticks, wandering aimlessly after their parents have perished. These are the famine orphans, a generation of traumatized homeless children. The Irish social structure, based on strong family and community ties, begins to disintegrate under the immense pressure. The traditional wake, a cornerstone of Irish culture for honoring the dead, becomes a luxury that cannot be afforded and a danger that cannot be risked. Funerals are hasty, fearful affairs. Sometimes there is no funeral at all. The dead are left in their cottages, the doors sealed, or buried in shallow, unmarked graves in the corner of a field. You are living through a terrifying preview of what is to come. The failed potato crop, the widespread starvation, the typhus epidemic, the mass evictions, the inadequate government response, the waves of desperate migration, all of these elements will return with even greater ferocity during the Great Hunger of the 1840s. The year without a summer in Ireland is a painful echo from the future, a forgotten chapter in the country's long and tragic history of famine. It leaves deep scars, depleting the population and embedding a folk memory of a time when the sky turned against the Irish people and the earth refused to give up its dead. Let us now turn our gaze to the other side of the world, for the shadow of Tambora was truly global. We travel to the vast empire of Qing dynasty China. You are a farmer in a place like Yunnan, a mountainous province in the southwest, or perhaps in the northern plains near Beijing. The European crisis of cold and rain is a distant, unknown affair. You are living in a world with its own cosmology, its own emperor, the Son of Heaven, whose rule is predicated on maintaining harmony between heaven and earth. In 1816, you witness firsthand the shattering of that harmony. The impact of Tambora's stratospheric veil on the Asian monsoon system is profound and devastating. The delicate balance of heat and pressure that draws moisture-laden air from the Indian Ocean is thrown into chaos. For you, a farmer in Yunnan, this means the life-giving summer rains, upon which your rice paddies depend, fail to arrive. The sky remains a pale, hazy blue. The sun, a dim, listless orb, beats down on your fields, but there is no water. You watch as your terraced rice paddies, those marvels of ancestral engineering, begin to dry up. The water level drops daily. The mud at the bottom cracks into a mosaic of earthen plates. Your rice seedlings, painstakingly transplanted by hand, wither and turn yellow, then brown. The water buffalo, your indispensable partner in agriculture, grows thin and listless, its ribs showing through its hide. The communal ponds and reservoirs that dot your village landscape shrink into muddy puddles. Further north, in provinces like Jiangxi and Anhui, the opposite catastrophe unfolds. The altered weather patterns cause torrential, unceasing rains, far beyond the normal summer floods. The great rivers, the Yangtze and the Yellow River, known as China's sorrow, swell to monstrous proportions. Levees that have held for generations are breached. A muddy, churning deluge pours across the plains, swallowing villages, destroying crops, and drowning thousands. You are either clinging to the roof of your home as the floodwaters rise, or you are watching your world turn to dust under a rainless sky. There is no middle ground. The Qing bureaucracy, renowned for its intricate system of granaries, designed to provide relief during famines, is pushed to its breaking point. This is not a localized drought or flood. It is a continent-spanning agricultural collapse. The ever-normal granaries, intended to stabilize prices by buying grain in good years and selling it in bad, are quickly depleted. Corrupt local officials, a persistent problem in the sprawling empire, see the crisis as an opportunity for personal enrichment. They hoard the relief grain, selling it at extortionate prices on the black market, or report false numbers to the capital to cover their own failures. You, as a starving peasant, are at the mercy of this system. You make the arduous journey to the county seat to plead for relief, only to be met with indifference or outright hostility from a magistrate who has already sold the grain meant for you. Your trust in the mandate of heaven, the cosmic belief that the emperor's righteous rule ensures nature's benevolence, begins to crumble. The emperor is in his palace in the Forbidden City, far away in Beijing. Here, in your village, the sky is barren, the earth is cracked, and the local officials are feasting while your children starve. Like your counterparts in Europe, you are forced to eat things that were never meant for food. The official histories and local gazetteers from this period record a litany of horrors. You strip the bark from elm trees, grinding the bitter inner layer into a powder to mix with what little flour you might have. You eat leaves, sawdust, and even a type of clay, called Guanyin soil, named after the goddess of mercy. This clay fills your stomach and gives the illusion of being full, but it has no nutritional value, and eventually leads to a painful death from intestinal blockage. Communities are torn apart. Families sell their own children, especially daughters, into slavery or servitude in exchange for a few bags of grain. This is a soul-crushing decision, a common practice in times of extreme famine, but no less devastating for the families forced to make it. Secret societies and bandit groups flourish in the countryside, preying on the weak and attacking government convoys. The social order, so central to Confucian philosophy, disintegrates into a chaotic war of all against all. The catastrophe is so profound and widespread that it shakes the foundations of the Qing dynasty itself. Historians now see the famines of 1816 to 1817 as a critical turning point, marking the beginning of a long period of decline for the dynasty. It weakened the state, exposed the rampant corruption, and sowed the seeds of popular discontent that would later explode in massive uprisings like the Taiping Rebellion. For you, these grand historical implications are meaningless. Your world is one of immediate, physical suffering. You are caught in a cycle of drought, flood, and famine that feels like a divine punishment. You perform rituals, you pray at the local temples for rain or for the floods to subside, but the heavens remain silent. The forgotten famine of Qing China is a stark reminder that the year without a summer was not a Western story. It was a global tragedy, and on the other side of the planet, under a different sky, you were enduring the exact same brutal lesson. When the sun is veiled, humanity starves. In a world where the fields are barren and the granaries are empty, the lines between right and wrong, between law and crime, become blurred and then erased. The social contract, the unspoken agreement to respect each other's property and safety for the common good, is one of the first casualties of widespread starvation. You are now living in a world where survival is the only law, and the struggle for it breeds a new, terrifying landscape of crime and equally brutal punishment. It begins with petty theft. You start to hear about neighbors who have had their last remaining chickens stolen from their coops in the dead of night. A sack of potatoes, more valuable than gold, disappears from a cellar. These acts are born of desperation, committed by people you know, driven by the cries of their hungry children. But fear and hunger are poor bedfellows for compassion. You bolt your door at night, view your neighbors with suspicion, and guard your own meager food stores with a new ferocity. A starving man is a dangerous man, and every one of your neighbors is starving. Soon, the thievery grows bolder. It is no longer about a few stolen vegetables. Organized gangs of desperate men, often called food rioters or beggar armies, begin to roam the countryside. They move from farm to isolated farm, stripping them of anything edible. You live in constant fear of a knock on the door that is not a knock, but the splintering of wood as it is kicked in. These are not malicious criminals in the ordinary sense. They are your fellow farmers, your fellow citizens, transformed by hunger into predators. If you are on the road, and a member of the great migration of the hungry, you are even more vulnerable. The roads are no longer safe passages, they are gauntlets run by bandits. They prey on other refugees, knowing that anyone desperate enough to be traveling might be carrying their last few coins or a final crust of bread. A lonely stretch of road, a dark patch of forest, these become places of mortal danger. You learn to travel in groups if you can, finding a fleeting, fragile safety in numbers. The crimes become more violent. A merchant known to be hoarding grain is found murdered in his home, his stores emptied. Disputes over the price of food in the marketplace, which once might have ended in angry words, now end with knives. The sanctity of human life erodes when life itself is a daily struggle against starvation. The fear of being robbed and the fear of starving create a paranoid, volatile atmosphere where violence can erupt from the smallest spark. The authorities, the local magistrates and constables, are completely overwhelmed. They cannot possibly police every farm and every transaction. Their response is not one of meticulous justice, but one of brutal, exemplary punishment, designed to terrify the populace back into submission. The laws are harsh, and they become harsher still. In England, the bloody code is in full effect. Stealing food worth more than a shilling is a capital offence. You could be hanged for stealing a loaf of bread or a side of bacon. You witness public executions, grim spectacles designed as a warning. A young man, barely out of his teens, is marched to a makeshift gallows in the town square. A magistrate reads his sentence, caught stealing 2 sacks of flour. As he is hanged, his desperate act of survival is reframed by the state as a terminal crime against social order. These executions do little to deter the hungry. A man who is sure to starve to death is not easily frightened by the prospect of being hanged. In other parts of Europe, the punishments are equally severe. Whippings, brandings, and public humiliation are common. A captured food rioter might be flogged in the public square, his back laid open with a leather whip. His screams are testament to the state's authority. These are not acts of justice, they are acts of terror, inflicted by a frightened ruling class on an even more frightened and desperate populace. The state is not trying to solve the problem of hunger, it is trying to suppress the symptoms. You are trapped in a vice. On one side are the criminals, your starving neighbors who will stop at nothing to feed themselves. On the other side is the state, with its gallows and its whipping posts, ready to make an example of anyone who steps out of line. The concept of justice becomes a hollow mockery. You cannot appeal to the law for protection when the law itself is as great a threat as the lawless. This breakdown of social order is perhaps the most frightening aspect of the year without a summer. It is not an act of nature like the cold or the rain, it is an act of man. It is the realization that civilization is a thin veneer, a fragile ecosystem that can be completely destroyed when one of its key pillars, the food supply, is kicked away. You are no longer a citizen in a society of laws, you are a survivor in a cold, Hobbesian world, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In the face of a catastrophe so vast and incomprehensible, you naturally turn to the frameworks that have always given your life meaning, your faith, your folklore, your understanding of how the world works. But in 1816, these systems of belief offer no comfort. They provide no answers. Instead, they warp and curdle under the immense pressure, becoming new sources of terror, division, and profound spiritual despair. Your first impulse is to pray. You gather in your cold, damp church on Sunday, your stomach empty, and you listen to the preacher. He speaks of trials and tribulations, of Job and the plagues of Egypt. He exhorts you to have faith, to pray for deliverance, and you do. You pray with a desperate sincerity you have never felt before. You pray for sun, you pray for warmth, you pray for the rain to stop, or to start. You pray for an end to the frost, but your prayers are met with a cold, silent, and indifferent sky. The frosts continue, the crops continue to rot, nothing changes. This divine silence creates a deep crisis of faith. How can a benevolent God allow his children to suffer so terribly? You begin to question everything you have been taught. Some of your neighbors stop coming to church altogether, succumbing to a sullen, silent atheism born of despair. Others become more fervent, more extreme. If simple prayers are not working, then clearly the sin that has brought this punishment upon you must be great. And if the sin is great, then the penance must be greater still. This desperate search for a reason, for someone to blame, quickly turns outward. The human mind recoils from the idea of random, meaningless suffering. There must be a cause, a reason, a culprit. If God is not directly responsible, then perhaps human agents of evil are to work in the world. And so, the witch hunts begin anew. You live in a community where folk beliefs in magic and witchcraft are still deeply embedded. You hear whispers about a reclusive old woman who lives at the edge of the village. Her crops, people say, seem less blighted than others. Perhaps she has made a pact with the devil, stealing the warmth and vitality from her neighbors' fields for her own. The dry fog is seen by some as a demonic miasma, a smokescreen for foul deeds. Accusations born of fear and envy begin to fly. A cow that goes dry, a child that sickens, the endless rain, all are twisted into evidence of malevolent witchcraft. These are not the great organized witch trials of centuries past, but small, localized, vicious flare-ups of a dormant paranoia. People are shunned, ostracized, and sometimes subjected to violent mob justice, all in a futile attempt to purge the perceived evil from your midst. The scapegoating is not limited to witches. Foreigners, beggars, and minority groups, like the Jews in some European towns, become targets of blame. They are the other, the outsiders, upon whom all the collective anxiety and misery can be projected. They are accused of hoarding food, of poisoning wells, of bringing a curse upon the land. Riots and pogroms, fueled by hunger and superstition, become another terrifying feature of this broken world. Beyond the search for human scapegoats, an even larger, more terrifying idea begins to take hold. This is not just a punishment. This is the end. You are living through the apocalypse, the end times foretold in the book of Revelation. The signs all seem to be there. The sun is darkened, the seasons are in chaos. There is famine, pestilence, and social breakdown. Millenarian prophets and doomsday preachers emerge from the woodwork, attracting desperate crowds with their terrifying charismatic sermons. They point to the sunspots as signs in the heavens, to the food riots as the wars and rumors of wars. They preach that the day of judgment is at hand. This apocalyptic thinking is not just confined to the uneducated. Even learned men and women are swept up in it. In New England, a farmer who called himself the New Light Prophet gathered hundreds of followers, convincing them that the world would end that year. They abandoned their farms, sold their possessions, and gathered on a hilltop to await the second coming, only to be met with another cold, bleak dawn. This mixture of fervent prayer, witch hunting, and an apocalyptic dread creates a toxic and volatile spiritual atmosphere. It does not unite your community in shared faith. It shatters it into factions of fear and suspicion. You do not know who to trust: your preacher, the doomsday prophet, your own despairing heart. The powerlessness of your belief is the ultimate psychological blow. Your God has fallen silent, the world has lost its meaning, and the only coherent narrative left is the terrifying one of a world spiraling towards its final fiery conclusion. You are adrift in a sea of cosmic terror, with no spiritual anchor to hold on to. Even in the darkest of times, humanity continues to create. But the art and literature, born from the year without a summer, are not celebrations of life and beauty. They are mirrors, reflecting the gloom, the anxiety, and the profound sense of a world gone wrong. To understand this, we must journey to a grand villa on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland, where a group of young, brilliant, and troubled English writers find themselves trapped by the incessant rain, and in doing so, give birth to monsters. The year is 1816. You are with them now. You are part of the circle that includes the volatile, brilliant poet Lord Byron, his personal physician John Polidori, the radical poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, and his 18-year-old lover, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, who will soon be Mary Shelley. They have come to Switzerland, seeking refuge and inspiration, but what they find is a prison. Day after day, the rain falls. It is a cold, relentless deluge that confines them indoors. The spectacular scenery of the Alps that they came to admire is perpetually shrouded in a grey, oppressive mist. A wet, ungenial summer, Mary would later write, and incessant rain often confined us for days to the house. The sky is a leaden ceiling, the lake a churning, choppy expanse of grey water. Thunder and lightning, more violent and frequent than usual, crash and echo through the mountains, providing a dramatic, terrifying soundtrack to their confinement. The atmosphere inside the Villa Diodati is as charged and gloomy as the weather outside. Their conversations are filled with the new, electrifying ideas of the age: galvanism, the notion that electricity could reanimate dead tissue, polar exploration, and the perilous quest for the unknown, the very nature of creation and divinity. They are surrounded by a world that seems to be falling apart, both politically after the Napoleonic Wars, and now, naturally. It feels as though humanity and nature are both out of joint. One dark and stormy night, to pass the time, Lord Byron issues a challenge. We will each write a ghost story, he proposes. It is from this simple rain-drenched challenge that two cornerstones of the horror genre will emerge. Lord Byron sketches out a fragment that his physician Polidori will later develop into the vampire, the story that establishes the template for the aristocratic, seductive, and predatory vampire that will dominate popular culture for the next 200 years, leading directly to Dracula and beyond. But the most significant creation comes from the youngest member of the group, Mary Godwin. She struggles for days to find an idea. Then one night, in a half-waking, half-sleeping state she calls a waking dream, the image comes to her. She sees it with shut eyes, but acute mental vision. She describes the pale student of unhallowed arts, kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life, and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. This terrifying vision, born in the gloom of the sunless summer, becomes the seed for her novel, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. The novel is saturated with the atmosphere of 1816. It is a story about a world out of balance, about creation gone awry. The monster, Victor Frankenstein's creation, is a being abandoned by his creator, left to wander a hostile and unforgiving world, much like the starving refugees wandering the roads of Europe. The novel's landscapes are not the sunny pastoral scenes of earlier Romanticism. They are vast, desolate, and terrifying Arctic wastes and stormy, windswept mountains, reflecting the icy, brutal reality of the year. The novel taps directly into the anxieties of the time, the fear of science overstepping its bounds, of man trying to play God, a fear amplified by the bizarre and inexplicable behavior of the natural world itself. Victor Frankenstein's sin is not just his act of creation, but his immediate abandonment and rejection of his creation, a profound failure of responsibility that unleashes misery and death. In a year when it felt like God himself had abandoned his creation, this theme resonated with a terrifying power. You are there in that dark room, listening as Mary begins to weave her tale of monstrous birth and tragic consequence. The story is a direct product of its environment. It is difficult to imagine a sunny, pleasant summer producing a novel of such profound darkness, alienation, and existential dread. The cold, the rain, the oppressive grey skies, the apocalyptic thunderstorms, the general sense of a world broken from its natural moorings, all of it is baked into the DNA of Frankenstein. The year without a summer did more than just starve the world, it also fed its nightmares. It created a psychological landscape of anxiety and gloom that provided the perfect fertile ground for the birth of the Gothic horror genre as we know it today. Mary Shelley, trapped indoors by the fallout of Tambora, did not just write a story, she captured the soul of a terrifying year and gave its nameless dread a monstrous, tragic, and unforgettable face. The world's suffering had found its gloomy muse. The end did not come with a sudden, triumphant sunrise. There was no single day when the world awoke to find that everything was back to normal. The return from the brink was as slow, as uneven, and as agonizing as the descent into it. For you who have survived the year without a summer, and the brutal winter and spring of 1817 that followed, the recovery is a process measured in tiny incremental victories and lingering profound scars. By the middle of 1817, you begin to notice the subtle changes. The persistent dry fog that has plagued your sky for nearly 2 years begins to thin. There are days now when the sky shows glimpses of a genuine deep blue. The sun, when it appears, seems to have regained some of its old strength, its warmth feeling more substantial, more capable of penetrating the chill that has settled deep in the earth. This is the physical sign of a planetary process. High in the stratosphere, the massive veil of sulfate aerosols from Tambora is finally, slowly, dissipating and falling out of the atmosphere. The planet is beginning to breathe again. The summer of 1817 is not a good summer by normal standards, but compared to the horror of 1816, it is a miracle. The frosts are less frequent and less severe. The rains in Europe, while still heavy at times, are not the relentless biblical deluges of the previous year. For the first time in 2 years, a viable harvest seems possible. You plant your crops with a feeling that is not quite hope, but a desperate, fragile prayer. You use the seed you somehow managed to save, or perhaps seed provided by a government relief program that is finally beginning to function. You watch over your small patch of corn or potatoes with an almost unbearable anxiety. Every cold evening, every dark cloud on the horizon sends a jolt of primal fear through you. You have been betrayed by the seasons once before, and you cannot bring yourself to fully trust them again. When autumn arrives, you go to your fields to find that a harvest of sorts exists. The ears of corn are not as full as they were in the years before the darkness, and the potatoes are smaller, but they are there. They are edible. They are real. The moment you pull a healthy, solid potato from the earth, or shuck an ear of corn that is not rotten, you are overwhelmed by a sense of relief so profound it feels like a physical weight lifting from your chest. You may even weep, the tears washing away 2 years of accumulated fear and despair. This small but successful harvest is the turning point. It breaks the back of the famine. Food prices, which had reached astronomical heights, begin to slowly, steadily decline. The market is no longer a battlefield. A loaf of bread is still expensive, but it is no longer an impossible luxury. The brutal, frantic edge of survival begins to soften. The great migrations of the hungry begin to subside. With the prospect of food available back home, the desperate wandering loses its purpose. Slowly, cautiously, people begin to trickle back to their abandoned villages and farms. You may be one of them. You return to the home you fled months or years ago, finding it in a state of disrepair, the fields overgrown with weeds. The work of rebuilding is daunting, but it is work with a purpose, a future. It is the work of life, not of mere survival. The diseases that stalked the famine also begin to recede. With better nutrition, your body's natural defenses start to recover. As people return to their homes and a semblance of normal hygiene becomes possible again, the typhus and dysentery epidemics begin to burn themselves out. The constant looming presence of death starts to retreat from the foreground of your daily life. But the thaw is not just a physical process, it is a psychological one, and it is much slower. The world you now inhabit is an emptier one. You look around your village, and you see the empty cottages of the families who did not survive, who starved, who succumbed to disease, or who simply left and never returned. You see the gaps in your own family. The trauma of the past 2 years is etched into you. You will forever be more frugal, more anxious about the future. You will never again take a good harvest or a warm summer day for granted. For years to come, you will instinctively hoard food, your cellar and larder kept fuller than necessary, a defense against the memory of starvation. The folklore of your community will be permanently altered, with 1816 entering the lexicon as the year without a summer, the poverty year, or simply 1800 and froze to death. It will become a benchmark for hardship, a story told to frighten children and to remind adults of the fragility of their existence. As the light and warmth slowly return to your world, you are a survivor. You are tougher, but also more brittle. You have looked into the abyss, and it has stared back at you. The slow thaw is a return to life, but not to the life you knew before. That world of naive trust in the constancy of nature is gone forever, frozen to death in the summer of 1816. The slow thaw of 1817 did not erase what happened. The year without a summer was not just a fleeting, nightmarish memory. It left deep, permanent scars on the land, on the course of human history, and on the collective psyche of the generations that endured it. As you live out the rest of your days, you are living in a world irrevocably shaped by that single catastrophic year. The most visible scar is demographic. Entire regions were depopulated, some through death, others through migration. In New England, the allure of the West, which was just a desperate rumor in 1816, became a foundational American myth. The year is often cited as a key driver of the westward expansion. Families who survived the New England famines had no desire to risk another such year in the rocky, unreliable soil of the Northeast. They headed for the fertile lands of the Ohio River Valley, accelerating the settlement of the American Midwest. You may have been one of these pioneers, your life's trajectory forever altered, pushed westward by the memory of a summer snow. In Europe, the political consequences festered. The failure of monarchies and local governments to effectively handle the crisis planted seeds of deep distrust and resentment among the populace. The food riots and the brutal suppressions were not forgotten. This discontent would simmer for decades, contributing to the wave of revolutions that would sweep across Europe in 1848. The memory of establishment figures hoarding grain while the people starved became a powerful rallying cry for future revolutionaries. You saw firsthand the failure of the old order, a lesson that would inform the political consciousness of your children and grandchildren. The crisis had an unexpected and profound effect on science. Before 1816, the study of weather was largely the domain of almanac makers and folk wisdom. But the sheer scale and inexplicability of the volcanic winter forced a new way of thinking. It was the first time that a single observable event was seen to have a verifiable global climate impact. This spurred the development of meteorology as a formal science. People began to meticulously collect and compare weather data from around the world, seeking patterns, trying to understand the vast interconnected systems that governed the planet's climate. Your suffering became the data that helped launch a new field of scientific inquiry. The economic impacts were also long-lasting. The The famine devastated the agricultural economies of many regions, but it also spurred innovation. In Germany, the desperate search for a non-grain-based mode of transportation, due to the mass death of horses from starvation, is said to have inspired the inventor Carl von Drais to create his laugh machine or running machine. This was the precursor to the modern bicycle, an invention born from a world without horsepower. But the deepest scars were the ones left in human memory and culture. The art, the literature, the folklore, they all carried the shadow of 1816. The darkness of Frankenstein would continue to haunt the literary imagination. The paintings of Turner, with their fiery apocalyptic sunsets, became icons of the Romantic era, capturing the strange, beautiful and terrifying skies of a world under the influence of Tambora. For you personally, the scar is intimate and personal. It is in the way you look at the sky, forever searching for a sign of another change. It is in the instinctive shudder you feel when a cold wind blows in June. It is in the stories you tell your grandchildren, stories that sound like fantastical fables but that you know to be grimly true. You tell them of a time when the sun was a pale ghost, when snow fell on summer fields, and when a loaf of bread was worth more than a man's life. The year the sun vanished was a brutal lesson in cosmic humility. It was a reminder that your civilization, with its armies, its empires, and its art, existed entirely at the mercy of vast, impersonal forces far beyond your control. It revealed the terrifying speed at which order can collapse into chaos, and how thin the veneer of humanity is when stripped away by hunger. You survived, but you are forever a child of the darkness, a citizen of a colder, more fragile world, carrying the memory of that terrible year like a permanent winter in your soul.